Right? Is this working? All right. Thanks for what? I already pressed it. Thanks for coming and for making it here after lunch. My name's Greg Dunlap, and this is the Content Strategy Toolkit, in which I talk about some of the tools we used for a big content strategy project we did recently at Lullabot. So, about me, my name's Greg Dunlap, as I said, and my Twitter is @GregDDunlap, and I am a digital strategist at Lullabot. I've been there for about 5 years, but I've been involved in Drupal for about 11 years, and after years and years and years of developing, I started getting more interested in sort of bigger picture problems and the problems that lead into projects that make them difficult. And so I started getting much more into the strategy side of things, and that's a discipline that we're starting to grow now at Lullabot. And in my spare time, as you can see, I play competitive pinball around the country. So that's sort of my thing. If you want to talk about pinball later, I will talk much longer about that than I will about Drupal. As I said, I work at Lullabot. For those of you who don't know, Lullabot's a strategy, design, and development company that creates high-profile, large-scale digital publishing systems using Drupal. And we've been really building our content strategy work recently. We're really into understanding the goals and problems around businesses and the needs that they have to solve, which is one of the things that makes strategy work so interesting to me, because it's early in those projects where those big questions get answered. And where the big problems get solved. So, and me and my colleague Jeff Eaton, who are the also other strategist at Drupal, we both have highly technical backgrounds. So we come at this from an angle that's pretty unique in the content strategy world. So before I get started, I named this talk without really thinking about the fact that there's actually a really great book that I read very early on in my content strategy career called the Content Strategy Toolkit. This has nothing to do with that book. This is a book full of like templates and example documents and all sorts of stuff, and it's really wonderful and it was really useful to me, and I don't know why I didn't realize that I had just named my talk after this book. I really wasn't trying to plagiarize or steal from anybody, but everybody who's interested in content strategy should get this book because it's super great. I know this is a Drupal event, so it's probably a little higher nerd level than your standard content strategy thing, but how many people in here would identify themselves as having any level of development experience or coding experience? Probably about half, so that's good because there's a bit of nerdiness in this talk. So. Is anybody in here familiar with the term DevOps as it relates to development? So DevOps is this idea that there's a lot of ways to look at it, but it's short for developer operations. And basically it's the idea that you can create a set of tools and processes that can be brought to bear on common tasks and make them repeatable and predictable for important stuff that you do all the time, like automated testing, deployment, and things like that. It increases the efficiency and productivity of your development team, but it also sort of eliminates the dependence of your development team on a team of sysadmins or other people that would typically put those things together. It's an idea that's really taken hold in the development world to bridge the gap between different disciplines and to take advantage of things that computers do well. And it's sort of broadened outside of that arena. There's a design ops conference now that started and a whole movement behind that. That's the slide I was supposed to go to where I said all that. And all of that. But basically the idea behind it is that, you should let computers do what computers are good at. There's lots of stuff that we need to do repeatedly over and over. And as human beings, we shouldn't be spending our time doing that. We should be spending time doing the stuff that the computers can't do well. And I was thinking about this a lot recently at Lullabot because there's nothing in the content strategy world that's equivalent of like strategy ops. And I think part of that's because the content strategy world tends to, as I said, be somewhat non-technical, and there's a lot of like big picture thought work around strategy and mobile and content modeling and stuff like that. But we don't talk a lot about like the day-to-day tools that we use to get our work done. And you know, I come from a very like open source sharing background where we talk about that stuff all the time, and so I wanted to sort of start bringing that discussion out because it's really important to us in how we work at Lullabot, and I think that as discussion around these tool chains and different things come to light, we can all learn from each other and build better stuff that will allow us to do what we are good at and let the computers do what they're good at. So a little bit of a warning. As I said, I assume the general tech level here is higher than a lot of content strategy conferences, but I may use the terms command line or SQL or even coding in this talk at some point. Please do not be alarmed. And I think a lot of people get kind of scared of the command line if they're not used to using it and stuff like that. But I mean, honestly, if you can create Excel formulas, which anybody who's done any level of content strategy gigs knows how to do, you can totally do this stuff too. So for some background, at Lullabot, we won a gig to do the content strategy for the state of Georgia. The project, Georgia has a Drupal 7 platform. It's a multi-site that holds 85 government agency websites. And on top of that, there are somewhere on the order of 40 or 45 other government agency websites that are not on the platform. And they're running the gamut of WordPress sites or independent Drupal sites or Dreamweaver sites, or they're all over the place. But the organization that runs digital services there, Digital Services Georgia, has a desire to bring everybody under the same roof because it allows them to increase consistency of citizen experience. It allows them to make sure that accessibility and mobile friendly patterns get spread across the platform and stuff like that. So when they talked about replatforming to Drupal 8, they really wanted to make a new system that was really appealing to all of their government agencies, and that was forward thinking because they wanted to be able to share information more easily around government agencies. They realized that the future is not necessarily in a browser. They're already experimenting with Alexa integration. They want to be able to integrate at different points with their agency partners, maybe outside of the traditional computer experience, and they know that they're going to need structured, predictable content in order to make that work. But on the other side of the equation, I don't know if anybody of you saw the talk that Brian Hirsch gave about the mass.gov project yesterday. He's in a situation where all of his agencies came together under one roof and one platform. And the Georgia project is not like that. All of the agencies are their own independent organizations running their own independent websites, even if they're on this platform. And there's no overarching organization around them. They're all run on their own with their own rules. And so getting to that content, getting to that place where their content is predictable and usable and structured, while at the same time not having the level of control or ability to manage the content that's actually being entered that Mass has, is a problem that they've been trying to balance for a long time. And so, as I said, and these sites are like 7 years old. This platform's been around for a really long time. So, and in the process of wanting to move to that omnichannel platform, they and us wanted to get a real good understanding of the content they had so that we could understand what it was, how it could be restructured in a meaningful way. And in order to do that, we had to analyze it. You know, we need a lot of different answers. What content is out there? What are the commonalities between the agencies? What kind of content do they all have that everybody can share and everybody can get use of? At the same time, what's different? What is the unique parts of the agencies? They had identified 7 verticals that existed within the state, like education and environment and government to government and stuff like that. And while there were some commonalities there, even within them, there were some differences. What that they're doing now needs to change for this new vision, and where are the landmines hidden? You know, we've got 7 years of content that was largely being dumped into body fields for across 85 different agencies whose level of technical knowledge and discipline was all over the map. So even before we knew he had won the project, Jeff and I started talking a lot about the fact that we were going to need an inventory, and that the inventory was going to be on a scale that we had never really approached before. And we also knew that in addition to analyzing the individual sites, we were going to want to aggregate them to run analysis across the whole set. We were going to need tools that were beyond what we usually do. You know, a lot of times we'll take an existing Drupal site and we'll just dump the node table, and it provides us the basis of the URLs and the content that's on the site. But we wanted to be able to do a lot more than that. And with 85 different independent sites, that was going to be a real challenge to bring together. We also knew we wanted something that was going to be very repeatable, because we knew we weren't going to get it right the first time. We knew that this was going to be an iterative process, and we knew that as we went on through the project, we may need to run these inventories multiple times because we may learn something new, or there may be another different angle of the data that we want to take at. And so we wanted to put together a tool chain that would allow us to this repeatable, predictable process while we went to the real work at hand, which was taking those inventories and making sense of them. And so we started researching that, and that's really what this is about, and the background of what we're going to talk about now. So, what do we need for an inventory? We need a list of all of the content. We need a way to run some sort of automated analysis on that content, whatever it may be. We need to be able to run it on specific slices of the data, because we may want to run some analysis on this set versus this set, or to see the results based on different sets of data. We wanted to be able to do it using whatever specifications we might want, whether it was code that we wrote ourselves or services that we integrated from the outside. And as a bonus, we wanted to be able to identify stuff that would be useful for the future migration. As anyone who's gone through a large-scale website migration knows, one of the biggest problems is finding the stuff that's going to be difficult to migrate, the places where they've dumped the internal styles into the body field, or where they've embedded 80 different things, or where they've created layouts with tables that break the site and stuff like that. So if we could identify that stuff as part of this automated process to hand off to development, it was going to save them a lot of time and effort. So one of the things that we started talking about was using a spider, a web spider, a tool to automatically crawl all of the URLs on the website. We usually don't do that, like I said. However, for this breadth of a project, we started talking about what a web spider would look like and what tools we could build to analyze the content that got out of it. There's sort of two classes of web spiders and content analysis tools. One is cloud-based. So you go onto a website and you punch in a bunch of information, and it goes off and retrieves it, and then you've got a web interface to download it and whatnot. The thing we didn't like about a lot of those tools was that because they're cloud-based, they're much harder to script and make repeatable. And their pricing models tend to be subscription and per URL based. In a situation where we were going to have to crawl 120,000 URLs probably multiple times, that wasn't going to be financially viable for us. So we were looking at native tools that we could run locally and predictably, and pay once and have more control. So the first step, generating the inventory. We found a really cool web spider, and it's got a really weird name. It's called Screaming Frog. It's at its core, it does what you would expect it to do. You give it a URL and it follows the links until there aren't any more, and it gives you a report of what it found. Right here you can see I ran it on our website, lullabot.com. It had some, but it had some really cool features that we really liked. It was highly configurable in a lot of different ways. You can tell it you can tell it what to scan and what not to scan. You can use regular expressions to include and exclude things, and all of this kind of stuff. It's very capable of handling extremely large data sets. In fact, it's built for the purpose of handling extremely large data sets. And it reports a lot of the common stuff that we knew we were going to need. Titles, response codes, H1s, etc. It had some advanced features, like for instance, it will parse JavaScript. That's one of the reasons it can scan our decoupled website, because it actually parses JavaScript, and other things. So here's an example of the stuff that you get out of it, basically. So you've got the status code and the status. You've got some linked information around titles and meta descriptions. One of the interesting things that that exposes its SEO focus is that it actually gives pixel widths for everything, because if you've done any SEO work, you realize that when Google decides where to truncate things, it uses pixels, not character counts. So that's interesting information and good information to have. H1s, H2s, word counts, text to HTML ratio, how deep down your structure you're crawling, in-links and outlinks and all of that kind of stuff. So this stuff is really good and really useful information. And then you can take this information, export it to CSVs or Excel, and you can get slices of it like just internal, just external, only the HTML pages, only the images, or etc. There's a lot of stuff that it generates, and it's really cool. It has some other stuff that's really interesting. For instance, it will give you a preview of how any individual URL will look when it's rendered in Google. One of the things that we find with SEO with our clients these days is that a lot of their SEO concerns are, they still worry about optimization and ranking, but they're also really concerned about metadata and how metadata is used to make their sites appear in Google, in Facebook, in Twitter, when their URLs are shared. Having a preview tool like this that will show you exactly how things will look is really, really useful. It's a great thing that we can offer to clients. And when we run this, and when we ran this spider, we just you can save, it has a special configuration file that you can save, and we just handed that off to them and said, you know, if you want to buy this software, and here's the thing, and you can use it for your own purposes going down the road too. This is data that we shared with them. So in this case, you can see that the meta description is truncated, right? It's too long and it's been truncated. So that may be something where I want to come back to whoever created this content or the content type and say, we may want to shorten the word count here, because we want to focus more on getting shorter descriptions so that they're not truncated when we look at them at Google. It has a lot of cool charts too. Here's one that shows all of the different types of content that came out of lullabot.com when I ran this. HTML, JavaScript, CSS, images, etc. And then you can click on any one of those things and get a subset of that data. This one's about page title information. How many duplicate page titles do you have? How many are over 65 characters? How many are below 30? Etc. Useful information. Again, you know, from an SEO focus, it makes a lot of sense that you would have this. And it has the pixels and stuff on there too. Response times. So there's a lot of really interesting and cool information here that it draws. It also integrates with Google Analytics. So when you run it, it will pull in any defined dimensions for your Google Analytics right alongside the URLs with everything else. That's obviously a very powerful tool, especially when you're analyzing existing content, because it allows you to, it gives you a way to tell which content is performing and which isn't, which can be really helpful when you're trying to decide what content to break out into new types and stuff like this. This is an example. This photo's a little blurry, but it has all of the Google things on there, like it has bounce rate for every URL, time on page, and all of that kind of stuff associated with it. So there's a lot of cool stuff here. But there was one thing that really put it over the top for us when we analyzed it, and that was that we could define custom functions in it to pull information out of the HTML and add it into the CSVs. And it uses an extraction language called XPath to do that. Is people in here familiar with XPath or not? Yes? No? XPath is a way to specify piece of an HTML page that you want to extract. And it also has functionalities. So for instance, here's some examples. So in this first example, if I wanted to get all of the H1s in a page, that's the way that you would specify it. If I wanted to get all of the class parameters out of each of those H1s, then I would specify it the second way. And then it also has all sorts of aggregation functions and stuff like that too, so I can get the count of the H1s instead of the individual H1s itself. Screaming Frog allows you to define XPath expressions that extract data out of your site. And there is a lot of information embedded in the HTML of your site, especially if it's using standard Drupal themes. And being able to pull that out as a part of this content audit is super compelling. Here's an example. This is the body class of a standard Drupal theme. Out of this, you can determine the node ID of the piece of content that you're looking at, its content type, and the context for the page that we're on. A lot of people complain about the number of classes and divs that Drupal provides around the ability to uniquely or not uniquely select pieces of information out of an HTML page. But from our perspective, having all of that information in there became really useful. There's tags for fields and blocks and fields types and view names and all of that kind of stuff. And when you're doing a content inventory, this information is really valuable. We had actually planned on having to take the spider and somehow tie it back, probably through the URLs, to the information in the Drupal database to get all of this stuff out. And instead, we were able to pull it out before we even started the project. We were able to build CSVs of information that we could break out by content type and know what content types they were using and what fields they had. As an experiment, I started making a piece of code which would try to build out a Drupal site architecture by extracting information out of the classes that it uses in its divs, and you can get shockingly far. Like I did as an experiment on the boston.gov website, which had just launched on Drupal, and you can get a lot of information out there. So for us, the ability to pull that information out was really something that really got us kick-started on the project early on. Because as you'll know, with a lot of government and higher ed projects, even once you start getting access to the code base and the databases and all of that stuff and going through I have to get a login, I have to get a VPN, blah, blah, blah. You may be like 2 weeks into a project before you actually get all of that stuff together. So for us to have that head start was really, really great. Another reason why this was really useful is because we were able to create XPaths to detect potentially problematic content or places where the body field had been misused. So in this example, you can see that the fourth line here, we created stuff that would determine when somebody was using an embed tag within the content frame, whether there was any embedded JavaScript in script tags in the content frame, embedded CSS, and embedded tables. So we were able to look through and find these places where things have been misused. So you can see here in the fourth line, we've got a page that has 2 external embeds, one piece of embedded JavaScript, and 2 tables. This page is probably a problem. And so we were able to find all of this, and we can pass this stuff off to the migration team so that they know what they're getting into early. Having all of this information aggregated together across all of the sites really gave us a leg up. And we really only scratched the surface in the kind of things that we could do with it, because we eventually had to deliver findings and stuff like that. You know, I was getting really into playing around with this and trying to figure out what we could dig out, and I actually had to finally do some work. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff here, and it's really, really cool. It's not perfect. It's not cheap. It costs it's 250 pounds. It's an English company, so probably more like $350 or $400 to purchase. But it's a one-time purchase. It's not a subscription. It will run on unlimited URLs and unlimited amount of data. It requires a lot of RAM. You really need to have your computer set up to do it for big data sets, and it's not fast, especially when you get into lots of custom extractions. I would just set it off and go to bed and come back and it would be done. Or sometimes I would set it off and go to bed and come back and find out it crashed because I ran out of RAM. But after I got those performance issues sorted out, it was a really, really good tool, and we knew very quickly that this was going to become part of our arsenal going on. So that was what we used for the content generation and inventory generation side. Now, another thing we wanted to do was some content analysis. We had originally planned to write a tool that we could write like little extensions for, and it would take a CSV of URLs, grab the HTML and scan it for readability, for instance, determine the grade level of the text that was in there and stuff like that. We still might, but we found out we didn't actually have to, because we found another tool that would do a lot of this content analysis stuff for us, and it was built for that purpose. And it's called URL Profiler, and this is that tool. What happens is that you load a CSV of URLs into URL Profiler, and it offers a wide variety of analysis that it can run on them. There's a huge number of options here, and again, this was really developed for advanced SEO purposes, but we found it really useful for our purposes too. A lot of these services are paid. They're external services that you have to pay a subscription to use and then add your API code or credentials into it. But a lot of them are free, and we really only ended up using one for this project, and it was the built-in readability tool that it provides, URL Profiler provides natively, and doesn't even really require an external thing. So what does that find for us? It would divide the page into sentence header and paragraph counts so that we had that information. It would give you the amount of time it takes you to read a page. It would give you the top 10 words on the page, taking into account context and frequency of use and removing, the and et cetera and stuff like that. It did sentiment analysis. It read the text on the page and determines whether the sentiment of the text was positive or negative based on the words that were used and the context in which they were used. And it did reading level scores. And it did a variety of them. It has four reading level algorithms that it uses so that you can actually compare across them and say, how come this says grade school for this one and college for this other one? And depending on what your preferences were or what you thought would apply best to your content, you can choose one of these to use. All out of the box. And then to top it all off, it actually is built to integrate with Screaming Frog's CSVs. So you can upload a CSV from Screaming Frog, run all of this stuff on it, and get back a CSV that combines the two result sets together. It's really, really cool. Again, takes a long time to run. It's doing a lot of calling out, but it's not quite as bad as Screaming Frog, and it doesn't require the system resources it does. And while it is a subscription-based tool, it's £20 a month. It's also an English company, and it works for up to 1 million URLs a month. So at least you're not URL limited, and you can get through a large amount of data. From a value perspective, it's really great. We may still end up someday writing our own version of this for our own specific purposes, but I mean, if we go back to here, it integrates with Moz and SEMrush for page rankings and SEO stuff. It does a lot of stuff that's domain level or URL level. So like we could have found out stuff about Georgia.gov as a domain, but also about the individual URLs. It also integrates with Google Analytics. It does all these things to talk about page speed and about whether your pages are mobile friendly. It integrates with the service that determines whether the content on your site has been plagiarized from content from another site. It does all sorts of really cool stuff. And again, we really only scratched the surface of the stuff that it can do. And it's also smart enough to know that it should throw away the text of like headers and sidebars and stuff like that to only concentrate on the stuff that's the real content of your site. And you can also give it, if you find out that it's not doing that well, you can give it a specific CSS selector within which you want it to limit its analysis. So for instance, if in our case we could use the content selector and it would only do the stuff between the content tags. Really cool tool. I gotta get past all of this again. So, we, oh, come on. So, now we have this gigantic CSV with like 800 columns on like 100,000 URLs. One of the things we did was that we brought it into a MySQL database, and that allowed us to do some aggregate analysis of it. I won't get into that whole thing now, but you know, SQL's really good at doing aggregate analysis of large sets of data. And we got a lot of we also got a lot of information out of it by just, you know, grabbing a column and sorting on it and seeing what the outliers were. So as an example, at one point I sorted the CSV of the scan of all of the URLs of all the sites by size. Like, what are the largest size pages on the network? And the largest size page, I went to it, and it was a bio page of a guy, and it had his photo in it and 4 paragraphs of text. I'm like, why is this page so large? What's going on with this? And so finally I viewed the source, and what had happened was that somebody had base 64 encoded his image and embedded it into the HTML on the page. So the HTML page size was the HTML and the image. We also found ones where, for instance, for whatever reason, like there were, you know, 50,000 non-breaking spaces added into the middle of a page or something. Like, there was really crazy stuff out there. But again, being able to easily find those outliers and edge cases was really useful, not only for us to hand off to the migration team, but also for the Georgia team to know how the site's being used and what kind of things we need to protect against in the editorial tools that we are designing and building. So we were able to do that, but for anything more detailed than that, obviously a CSV of 100,000 URLs is unwieldy. We could bring it into Excel, but with data sets this big, Excel gets slow, and don't even talk to me about Google Docs with something of this size. We needed to be able to break it down. We also started seeing stuff like this. As government agency employees, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this. This is the types of pages that we got out of the first scan that we ran of the web spider. You can see that the light-colored band is the HTML pages, and the orange band is the PDFs that we found. So there were 40,000 PDFs and 35,000 HTML pages. You know, this is not a surprise. It was a surprise to us, but to a lot of you, I'm sure it's not a surprise. And you know, we wanted to be able to take this. We wanted to be able to take this data out and run it through URL Profiler and things like that. But on the other hand, running the URLs of 40,000 PDFs through URL Profiler isn't going to get us anything. It's not, because URL Profiler won't scan the text of those PDFs. It's just going to be wasted time. So we needed a way to extract that information out. But we still wanted it because there was other kind of analysis we were going to want to be able to run on the set of documents. What document types are there? How are they divided up by agency, etc. So we needed a way to be able to slice and dice this data down into manageable pieces that we defined. And once again, we thought about having to code that ourselves, but we were lucky enough to discover the third and final piece of the equation that allowed us to go forward with this. And it's a command line tool called GoCSV. And this is where things start to get pretty nerdy. So this is a tool that you install on your system, and you run command line actions to run manipulations on CSV files of large sizes. It never had a single problem running on any of the files that we threw at it. It was absolutely fantastic. It has a wide variety of commands. The commands can be piped. In other words, you can run a command and then take the output of that command and run it back into GoCSV to run another manipulation and do things like that. And it's very well documented. And so here's a list of the commands that you can run using GoCSV. So you can sort, you can break a CSV into multiple files, you can bring multiple files into a single CSV, you can extract the first or last X rows. You can detect CSV formatting problems. You can do a wide variety of things. It's really cool and really well thought out. But the thing that really captured our eye was this one, filter. Extract rows whose columns match a criteria. This is where things really started to work for us, because this allowed us to break the gigantic CSV into manageable pieces. We could filter out based on any criteria in any column that we had, and we had like 150 columns in this data set, and a lot of them were columns that we had created ourselves, not knowing what we were going to really need them for, like the content type and stuff like that we had extracted. And now we knew exactly what we could do with them. So for instance, we could use this to filter out the document files. We can filter out all sorts of criteria. We can filter it by domain, by response code, by content type, all of this stuff, and we did. So this was the base set of data that we used for the Georgia site. And what it was, so at the top we had the gigantic mass of everything, and we broke that out by content type, by domain, by response code, and by vertical for the individual sites. And we did all of this by creating a command line script with a ton of Go CSV commands in it that we could just run every time we ran the spider. Then we also had the docs and no docs areas, which broke apart the document files and the non-document files into separate areas. And then we also broke those apart for the documents by domain and by vertical, and for the non-documents by content type and by domain and by vertical. And so by doing this, we had these, what amounted to essentially 500 CSVs in the end. But every time we ran the spider and ran URL Profiler, we had this script that we could run that would take it and slice it off in all of the ways that we wanted. And if we came up with another one, we just add it, delete all the files, and run it again. It was everything we had hoped to have and put together, and we didn't have to write a single line of code ourselves, which was really amazing. And the fact that it was repeatable was super important. So for instance, one of the things that we had done very early on was, like, when we ran our first spider, we were thinking, we're not going to take paginated URLs. We'll cut them out because it's just going to waste a lot of time following 50 pages of views. And as long as we have the base view, the main page, we don't need to know that there were 50, that it paginated out to 50 pages. Next. But one of the things, and then after we did that, we started looking at the content set, and we were spot checking it to make sure we had everything. And there were some sites where we realized we were missing a lot of content. And what we figured out was that there's a lot of content that's only linked to in those paginated views. And so by eliminating those views from our scan, we had lost that content. And so we had to put those pages back in and rerun everything. And now, because we had put the work in to make these scripts, the work of breaking this stuff out was easy. We still had to wait all day for the scan to run, but once we had done it, we could break it out into the pieces that we needed really simply. It saved us so much time, and it made the act of running those scans so much less stressful, because we knew if we got it wrong that all of the work that we had to get out of it was going to be so much less, because we had put the time in to put these tools together. And now, once we had all of these slices, we could go crazy, and we put together all sorts of really interesting data sets. This is the number of document files on each domain on the website. So across the bottom is every domain that we scanned, and then the number of document files. So you can see here, there's a lot of outliers, but in general, the document file usage is actually not that bad. It's mostly focused on one set of sites. So when we're designing document management solutions, what that tells us is that there are going to be a lot of really power users for document management. So for instance, Department of Revenue is one of the sites that's one of the things, because they have to have tax forms up there for 5 years for corporate tax and individual tax and all the other things. And so they've got a lot of document management needs, but most sites don't. And so we need to keep that in mind when we're designing our document management solutions. This is another one that shows the ratio of documents to HTML pages on every site in the network. So on the left, you have sites that have more than double the amount of documents that they do content. And in the middle, the ones who are about even, and on the right, the ones that have doubled the amount of content that they have documents. The agency head, his name's Nikhil, really loved this because this is data he can take to the agencies and say, you're really just using your websites as document dumps. You should be taking this information and making it more available. And you know, he has facts to back it up. He has reality to back it up. This was the average grade level of readability by the domains across the site, divided into college, high school, and grade school level. This is another thing that he can take out to the agencies and say, you know, this is something you really need to work on because it's not in the best interest of our citizenry to have things at a you know, college sophomore reading level up on the website. Yes.
Quick question: is that English only, or just
Yes. There was no foreign language scanning done. Yes. And it also allowed us to be able to say, when we're doing our content audits and when we're creating our editorial tools, there's obviously most of the websites are being written to a higher grade level. What can we do to expose that information to the users so that as they're writing content, they know what's going on and they can fix it as it's being written, and also create dashboards that we can show and expose to people saying, here's all of the content on your site and here's the stuff that's being written above college level. And then we can focus that stuff for the agencies that need it. Another really cool thing that happened that we had never really intended to happen was that after running a scan, I was doing another spot check and I realized that in the spider, we had only found 500 pages, but on the site they had like 1,000 pages. I had seen it I was looking at the content admin in the website, and it was like, there's a lot more pages of content here than we have in our CSV. Why is that? And one of the things that we found was that they had at some point done a redesign of the site and rewritten all the content, but they had never unpublished all the old content. It was still sitting there being indexed by Google out there, and it wasn't linked to by anything, which is why our spider had never found it, but it existed there on the website. But if we had never run the spider, we may have never really figured out that all of that content was sitting there stranded because we never would have realized that it wasn't being linked to from anywhere. And in Drupal 7, we didn't really have the tools that we have in Drupal 8 to track the inbound links and stuff like that. This stuff came in so useful in so many different ways. At the end of the slides, I have links to all of these tools and stuff like that, and I'm in the process of writing a series of articles for Lullabot.com that describe this process and also go into more detail about the scripts that we wrote and how we used the tools in order to break out content with examples and stuff like that that aren't realistic to do here. But some tips that I can give you right now: grab more, not less. What we found, like for instance, early on, one of the things we did was we ran a spider for every individual agency on its own. But then we realized we had now 85 CSVs, but we didn't have an easy way to have the aggregated kind. Also, early on, we didn't grab image files, but then later we found out we wanted to run stats on those image files, and we wanted to have the ability to scan them and have information about them, so we ended up rerunning everything. Over and over, we determined that living through the extended length of a scan for more information saved us more time than trying to break it down and then discovering we didn't have the information we wanted. That's related. Grab everything at once. Just get everything you can, and then because you've got these tools in which you can break it down, it's not as big of a deal. Accept that it's an iterative process. Make whatever you can repeatable. Nobody's going to get this kind of work done at once. I mean, even with the experience we've had on this set of sites, we could go to an entirely different government agency and come up with an entirely different set of problems. You know, if you put a lot of pressure on yourself to get it right the first time, that's no good. Just accept and prepare for the fact that you're going to have to do things several times, and make it so that you can, so that the stuff you're going to have to do multiple times that you can make repeatable is repeatable. And then if you're getting into migration, take it into account and try and find the stuff that you know is going to be a problem for migration up front. The earlier you can identify that, the earlier you can make it available to the development team that's doing the migration, and the more of that stuff you can take into account when you're building your editorial tools. So this was just about content inventories, but I mean, there's a lot of other places we could go with this. If you've used the tool Sketch for designing, it's a tool for mocking up web pages. It has an integration in which you can identify pieces of the Sketch file as data fields and then attach it to JSON so that you can test your designs with real content. That's something that we're really interested in trying out. We didn't do design stuff on this project, so we didn't have a reason to, but it's a place where we could see automation and grabbing content from these audits and putting together a chain that pulls it into the design process for testing. At IA Summit this year, a guy named Andy Fitzgerald gave a demo of a tool that he wrote that was similar. He created very simple structural HTML templates and put together a process for taking JSON and dumping real content into them again that he had gotten out of inventories so that he could identify layout problems when content over here was real long and content over here was real short. Very, very early in the design process before a lot of assumptions had been made about how pages were going to be laid out structurally. And who knows what else we can dream up. I mean, this is a really new field, and content strategy itself is a really new field, and the tools around this are just starting to be developed and figured out, and I think it's going to be a really exciting time for us, especially in the Drupal field, because we have a unique, again, in the content strategy realm, we're uniquely placed because a lot of us have much more technical experience than the general content strategy world, and it's really a place where we can make ourselves known. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I saw that you were able to categorize the PDFs by, like, say, vertical.
Mm-hmm.
And did you do any type of deeper data analysis on the PDFs? Did you have a tool to do that, or was it just kind of a big black box?
For the moment, it was a big black box. We did identify tools in which we could index and OCR basically the PDFs and get the text out of them and analyze it. We didn't do it as part of this. We may actually bring some of that to bear in the system, though, because we've been talking about ways that we can, for instance, when you upload a PDF, we could OCR it and attach that text to it, to the node that the document's attached to. Or we can extract, if we extract the first line, how often can we use that to auto-generate the title for the node that the document's attached to? And then the people don't have to type it in. Or can we find the first paragraph and make that the description for the node, and then people don't have to type it in? Because one thing we found is that people who upload PDFs, like they'll type in the title and then just copy the title into the description text, and that's not useful to anybody. Or can we use the most frequently used words as tags and stuff like that? We've talked about that stuff, but we haven't gotten anywhere with it yet. Those tools do exist, though, in PHP and on the command line and as part of search indexing tools. Like there's one for Solar, I think it's called Tico or something. Tika, yeah. And we're doing that on the Solar side for search indexing, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
So you made a lot of recommendations for the discovery phase of the content strategy. Do you have any recommendations for tools or processes for, for instance, for content migration, how to restructure the information architecture, or new content types for the clients?
Yeah. So the question is, do I have any recommendations for tools for the next stage, which is basically content modeling, restructuring content, doing IA and stuff like that. For us, a lot of that stuff comes down to we're Drupal people and we do a lot of that stuff in the CMS. We do a lot of modeling and testing in the CMS. But honestly, we have a lot of Excel spreadsheets. We have an Excel spreadsheet for all of the problematic content we found, and we have an Excel spreadsheet for the content model and for our paragraph types and for our views and all of that stuff. We have a lot of spreadsheets. We do use Omnigraphal a lot too, especially for doing things like diagramming content relationships, putting together simple wireframes for testing, all of that kind of stuff. But I would say that at a base level, our day-to-day tools are Excel and Omnigraphal, and that when we get into the real work, that's where all of that stuff lies mostly.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I'll get out of here so the next speaker has time to get ready, but thanks a lot.
deal with some of the.
Hey, thanks. Thanks.
One of those things where you're like, I love the, oh no, we got a bunch of data, and then looked at it.
Yeah. Amber was saying that you guys might be able to use some of that now because you've been thinking a lot about your content types and stuff like that.
I did a thing for Drupalize Me where I wrote a tool